and welcome to Pockenrop. Today's video is my top 15 albums of the year 2020, the pandemic year we've all just lived through. Weird year for pretty much everybody across the globe, but for me it meant that because of the extra time that I had, not going out, not doing things that I love, I was able to reconnect with some of my musical interests and passions. This video has been prompted by a colleague, shout out to Matt Jenkins, who told me his top 10 albums of 2020, and that started me thinking that I should maybe listen to some newer stuff again. So as we run through my top 15, I'm going to mention at least a track from each album, or three, that I particularly enjoyed, that I think reflect how good the album really is. So if you haven't got the patience to go through and listen to a whole album, then you can jump in at least Spotify a track and maybe see if it's for you. So let's dive straight in at number 15 with Beyond the Pale by Jarvis, aka Jarvis Cocker. This is hardcore era pulp. So it's a really positive album. It's really good. I recommended this to the same colleague who, when he heard it, immediately went out and bought the vinyl. Track that I'd recommend from there to kind of see whether or not you like it is the track Must I Evolve. So at number 14, if you watched previous videos of mine, you'll know that I enjoy 80s pop and particularly have a special place in my heart for the band Bucks Fizz. So at number 14, I have got Smoke and Mirrors by the Fizz. These are the three members of Bucks Fizz who have kind of struck out on their own without the other member. There's a whole load of litigation and argument in the past if you want to ever find out about what happened. But they are still releasing new music and have been for the last 4 years or so. Smoke and Mirrors is a great pop album. It's classic Bucks Fizz, even though it doesn't carry the name Bucks Fizz. Several tracks on here I could recommend. TOTP is great. Storm's great, and particularly I think the standout track is probably The World We Left Behind. So number 14, Smoke and Mirrors by the Fizz. Staying with the pop theme, for my number 13, I have placed Young Dumb Thrills by Mcfly. Bit of a surprise for me. I'm not anti-Mcfly. I quite like some of their songs. I particularly like All About You. I think it's a great pop song, one of the best of the 2000s. But Young Dumb Thrills turned out to be quite a surprise album. It's just good pop rock. Sample track for you on this one would be Another Song About Love. It's a good pop rock album. If you enjoy that kind of music, check out Young Dumb Thrills by Mcfly. Number 12 is a long-time favourite band of mine, dating way back to the 80s, and it's the Pet Shop Boys and their latest album, Hotspot. It's not perfect. The last track in particular is utterly forgettable, and the album would be enhanced without it by some distance, but the rest of it is classic Pet Shop Boys throughout. Both their clever pop from the late 80s and some of their more dance style stuff that they moved into the 90s and noughties. Sample track, I'd recommend listening to Dreamland, which I think might have been the lead-off single. So, number 12, Hotspot by the Pet Shop Boys. At number 11, I have got an artist called Torrin Wells, and it's the album Citizen of Heaven. This is a Christian music album. It's a combination of some worship songs and other contemporary songs, and there's a real 1980s Michael Jackson feel to this album. So I was listening to this, going about my day, thinking this sounds really like Michael Jackson. And then when I looked it up on Wikipedia, I'm not the first person to say that. So you can trust that if you like Michael Jackson and you are prepared to sample out some Christian pop, kind of almost soul / worship stuff, Citizen of Heaven by Torrin Wells. Standout track by a country mile is the track Famous For, which you can also find as part of an elevation worship. You can find that on YouTube, you'll find it on Spotify. A great song. So that rounds out the first 5 on my list. Into the top 10 now. And I'm a big fan over the years of Paul Heaton and the Beautiful South. And in 2020, Paul Heaton and Jackie Abbott released Manchester Calling. This is the 4th of their albums together. It continues that great run of Paul Heaton's songwriting. It's every bit as good as the previous one, Crooked Calypso. It's 16 tracks long. They could have shaved the last 2 tracks and I don't think it would have been a problem. The actual title track, Manchester Calling, is, I find, pretty much unlistenable. But the rest of it is classic Paul Heaton. My most recent episode of the podcast that my son and I do, Generation Mix, is all around the music of Paul Heaton, running from the House Bombs all the way through to Crooked Calypso. There could have been tracks off this that I'd have happily picked. For instance, A Good Day Is Hard to Find, or If You Could See Your Faults. They are classic Paul Heaton numbers. Check them out on Spotify. Number 10, Manchester Calling by Paul Heaton and Jackie Abbott. Quick word to the wise, if you're going to buy it, there is now a 2 CD version. There is almost a full second album now added to that. I think if it ever comes out properly on vinyl, that 2 CD, it will be a triple album. There's that much in terms of material. At number 9, I have an album by a band I'd never heard of until my colleague did his top 10. And that's the Spitfires, and the album is Life Worth Living. I'd like to thank Matt for recommending this to me. So he says there's a real jam vibe to it, and he's not wrong. Not just that, I can hear madness influencing what the Spitfires do. Life Worth Living is a great album. The tracks I'd recommend to that are the title track, Life Worth Living, and also Just Won't Keep Me Down. This is their 4th album, I think. I am in the process of listening to their previous albums, and yeah, if you like the jam, if you like Paul Weller, then you will probably like the Spitfires. So check it out, Life Worth Living, my number 9. And now we're getting to the ones where I do own the albums, mostly. And at number 8, I have got Chris Tomlin and Friends. So Chris Tomlin, again, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll know is a worship songwriter that I really like, but this is different. This is a country-ish album. Yes, it is Christian music. Yes, there are potential for some of these songs to be worship songs that could be used in church, but Chris Tomlin and Friends is just a really good country album. Several really good tracks on here that you can get buried into. They're all collaborations, so taking a leaf out of Ed Sheeran and his Collaborations number 6 album. For casual listener, I'd recommend the opening track, Thank You Lord, with Thomas Rhett and the Florida Georgia Line. I'd also recommend Who You Are to Me, which he recorded with Lady A, which I think is Antebellum. So there's well-known country artists on this album working with Chris Tomlin. That's my number 8, Chris Tomlin and Friends. At number 7, I don't own it yet, but I intend to. I have placed AC/DC and Power Up. So AC/DC have been around since the early 70s, Australian rock band. They were pretty much defunct, I would say, once Brian Johnson said he was retiring due to hearing issues. But somehow he's back with them. And they have recorded their first album since Angus Young died. And it is Power Up. And it's classic AC/DC. You know what you're letting yourself in for. So, recommended tracks would be Wild Reputation and Code Red. So check out those, see whether or not you'd like AC/DC's Power Up. At number 6, I have got, when you can see that or not, We the Kingdom and the album Holy Water. Now, again, if you watched the previous video, you'll know how much I am fond of a band called Third Day, who have sadly disbanded. This album scratches my Third Day itch. It is like southern rock roots album, and again, it's a Christian worship album. This is phenomenally good, and I would recommend this to anybody who's got even a passing interest in Christian music. We the Kingdom are a great band. They're a family band as well. They feel tight-knit, and the music just wonderful. Recommended tracks, if you want to check them out, would be Child of Love, which is wonderful, and also the title track, Holy Water. So that's my number 6, Holy Water by We the Kingdom. Moving into the top 5 now, and this was a surprise for me. Although I do like this man's songwriting and have done for many years, but I have placed Gary Barlow's Music Played by Humans. I like swing music and big band, and this is an album all written by Barlow of swing songs, and they are great. This is a really enjoyable album. I bought this for my mum because I know she likes this kind of thing too, but I also got it for myself because it's my number 5 album of 2020. Sampleable tracks, I'd recommend Who's Driving This Thing, which opens the album. The lyrical interplay that he comes up with is just fantastic. Bad Libran, he just riffs through the star signs and the alleged qualities of them. It's a really funny song, Bad Libran. Before We Get Too Old just really stands out. There's a duet on here with James Corden, which is called The Friend I Need, and it's all about if I'm in a fix and this is the problem, I wouldn't contact you, because you're not the friend I need in that context, but you're the friend I need for almost everything else. And it's a great song. My number 5, the rather surprising Music Played by Humans by Gary Barlow. At number 4, I've got an album by the second oldest artist in my list at the age of 70, and that is Letter to You by Bruce Springsteen. This is a great Bruce Springsteen album. Now, I'm a casual Springsteen listener, although I have heard most of what he's released up to Tunnel of Love. I have heard The Rising. I think I've listened to Working on a Dream. It never really burrowed in, but this album I thought was really good. This was up there with something like Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, or Born to Run, or The Tunnel of Love itself, which I was listening to the other day and reminding myself how much I liked it. It's funny with Springsteen, I listen to his albums and I enjoy them, and then I don't listen to him again for ages and ages. But I think I'm going to be playing Letter to You quite often. Sampleable tracks from this, in my view, is The House of a Thousand Guitars. I think it is a really good song. Almost reminds me of Leonard Cohen, and maybe it's that Tower of Song kind of vibe that Leonard Cohen had going on. Ghosts, great track. The Power of Prayer. I think the second half of the album is better than the first, but that said, the whole album is just great, and I'm really glad I got this on vinyl. It's a 3-sided album. Side 4 is an etching, couldn't care less. But Letter to You is my number 4. Before I do my top 3, usual thing that I do, little montage of the album covers that didn't make it in. You'll be seeing Green Day, Father of All, City of Love by Deacon Blue. Deacon Blue albums tend to grow on me over time, so this list may well change if I was to revisit it in 2 or 3 years' time. Rough and Rowdy Ways by Bob Dylan. Song for Our Daughter by Laura Marling was just edged out by Jarvis. So into my top three, all three of which could be construed as surprise albums for 2020. In other words, they are the products of the lockdown that we've all endured. My number three, though, is Taylor Swift and Folklore. So I quite like Taylor Swift anyway. I think she's a great songwriter. This album marks a transition into becoming a phenomenal songwriter. It was released, as I say, as a surprise album. It was kind of announced and then it was out the following day. No one knew it was coming. And she had time on her hands because her tour was cancelled due to pandemic. And she wrote these songs over, I think she used iTunes and GarageBand and things like that with her producer. They never met, but they have produced in my case, a 17-track album that's just brilliant. This is classic singer-songwriter stuff, and I think represents a real maturation of Taylor Swift as an artist. Recommended tracks if you want to dive in on Spotify or even YouTube would be Last Great American Dynasty, although she sings it Dynasty. This Is Me Trying. The Lakes, which is the bonus track, is also excellent. But the absolute best track on here for me is Betty. Now, be warned, there's a little parental advisory sticker on the bottom of here. That's because there's a little bit of language on here from naughty Taylor Swift, and Betty is where most of it happens. It's a great song. It's a great album. My number three, Folklore by Taylor Swift. Number two was my most anticipated album of 2020. In June, I did a listen through of every single studio album by this artist, one a day. There were 25 albums for me to go through. This is their 26th. And doing that, you started to think, because of the lockdown, we're going to get the third of a trilogy, 50 years in the making, and we got it. McCartney 3. I was buzzing for this album. I avoided, as much as I could, any musical pre-releases, so for 12 days prior to its release, there was sheet music versions of the songs that were to come plastered on billboards around the globe. And people were invited to do a recording of the music, and I tried to avoid as much of those as I could because I wanted to come to this fresh and relive the excitement of a brand new McCartney album for the first time since 1989 for me, where my excitement levels were that high, and it didn't disappoint. This isn't just a good McCartney album, this is a great McCartney album, and the man is 78. Tracks to sample, so many, but I particularly love Seize the Day. That is almost a classic McCartney or a Wings track for me. Lavatory Lil, which is just a great little rocking number. When Winter Comes, but you could sample almost anything on this album and you would get a really good flavour of what McCartney 3 is about. He plays almost everything on it. He produces almost everything on it. It is a worthy third part in the McCartney trilogy. McCartney 3, my number 2. So what could possibly have edged out my all-time favourite artist into the number 1 spot? Well, I don't own it yet, but I have every intention of owning my own copy of Taylor Swift Evermore. So having dropped Folklore in the middle of the year as a surprise album, she only went and did it again less than 6 months later and did Evermore. And for me, Evermore is the better album of the two. I cannot think of an artist as prolific as she has been in the last 6 months, ever. The closest I can think of is Elton John, when he used to release 2 albums a year So in 73, for instance, he released Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player, and then a double album. She has just released, with the space of 6 months, effectively 2 double albums worth of really top-notch material. Sample tracks for that would be No Body, No Crime, which she does with Heaton. And that's just a great pop song. Admittedly, it's a murder ballad, but there's nothing wrong with that. Champagne Problems, Marjorie, which is about her late grandmother. If folklore represented her maturation, then for me, Evermore represents her really coming of age. I am excited to think what this artist might go on and do, because she is amazing. And I find it remarkable that I'm saying that, because at one point I dismissed her as just pop, and she's so much more than that. So my number 1 album of 2020 is Evermore by Taylor Swift. So that's my top 15 of 2020. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the video. What would you have left out of my list? What would you have included? Are there any great albums that I've missed that I maybe should have another listen to? And maybe I'll revisit this video in a couple of years' time. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.